The 1954-1956 twin-engine GMC Greyhound PD-4501 Scenicruiser bus, the icon of the American road. Chapter 1. A Dream in Glass and Aluminum, The Birth of a Legend, 1947 to 1954. When we talk about the iconic symbols of 20th century American culture, buses rarely come up in the conversation. And that's a shame, because in 1954 a vehicle rolled onto American highways that completely transformed our understanding of what long-distance travel could be. It was the GMC PD-4501 Scenicruiser, a two-level marvel built for Greyhound Lines, and its creation was the result of more than 7 years of dedicated work by designers, engineers, and ambitious leaders. The story began long before 1954. In the mid-1940s, as post-war America rediscovered its spirit of optimism and movement, Greyhound Lines, the world's largest passenger transportation company, faced a challenge. How could they redefine long-distance travel? How could they make it not just comfortable but truly luxurious? That's when, in 1947, legendary designer Raymond Loewy joined the project. Loewy was a French-American industrial designer whose impact on American design was so significant that Time magazine featured him on the cover in 1949 with the headline, "The Man Who Shaped America." Loewy and his team created two prototypes, the GX1 and the GX2. The GX1 was conceived as a true double-deck bus with completely separate levels. The upper deck seated 37 passengers who loved panoramic views, while the lower deck held 13 more. The driver sat on top, commanding the vehicle from 3.5 meters above the road. The design was patented as U.S. Patent Number 2, 563-917, registered in 1951, with two names listed, Raymond Loewy and Orville Caesar, president of Greyhound. However, when these tall machines were tested, engineers discovered an unforeseen problem. The GX1 was simply too tall. It didn't fit into Greyhound's existing bus terminals. Plus, the upper deck was cramped, and the luggage compartment wasn't large enough. Orville Caesar, a pragmatic executive, made a historic decision. He ordered the design reworked into what became known as the split-level configuration. The front section would be higher for panoramic viewing through large windows, while the rear section would be lower. This allowed for a lower overall height, better visibility for the driver, and a spacious luggage compartment beneath the upper deck. This solution became the GX2 prototype, completed by 1952. It was a bold and radical design. At 40 feet long, that's 12.19 meters, the bus exceeded the legal length limits in most states at the time. But Caesar and Loewy knew they were right. The GX2 was powered by a single Detroit diesel 671 engine, a powerful 6-cylinder diesel, paired with a 4-speed transmission and a 2-speed splitter, giving a total of 8 forward gears. All the revolutionary ideas that would make the Scenicruiser legendary were already built into this prototype. But design was only half the story. Chapter 2. Engineering Ambition and Its Price. The Birth of Difficult Twins, 1954 to 1955. In late 1953, General Motors began developing the production version based on the GX2 prototype. The new bus received its official name, the GMC PD-4501 Scenicruiser. The abbreviation broke down like this: P for parlor, borrowed from railroad terminology, D for diesel, 45 for the nominal capacity, though in reality it held 43 passengers due to an onboard restroom, and one for the first model in the PD-4500 series. In total, 1,001 buses were built, from July 1954 through 1956. That number seems almost symbolic of perfection or good fortune. At first glance, the Scenicruiser was a masterpiece. It was a three-axle monocoque, a single unified steel body, equipped with air suspension, air conditioning, and panoramic windows running from floor to ceiling on the upper deck. Beautiful interior appointments promised comfort. The lower deck seated 10 passengers plus a restroom. The upper deck seated 33, 10 wheels, 4 on each of the 2 rear axles, and a 680-liter fuel tank promised comfortable journeys spanning hundreds of kilometers. But where General Motors engineers faced a critical decision, they made a fateful mistake. The problem: where was the V8? In the 1950s, the engineering philosophy was simple: more power equals better performance. The Scenicruiser weighed about 11 tons when fully loaded, which required a reliable and powerful engine. The logical choice would have been one large engine. A powerful diesel V8 would do the job perfectly. But General Motors had a problem. In 1954, the company didn't yet manufacture a diesel V8 for trucks and buses. Their Detroit diesel lineup included 4-cylinder engines called the 471 and 6-cylinder engines called the 671, but nothing larger. And GM was too proud to install engines from competitors like Cummins. So the engineers chose what seemed like a logical solution. They installed not one, but 2 Detroit diesel 471 engines. 2 4-cylinder diesel engines, each displacing 284 cubic centimeters, each producing 160 horsepower, were positioned side by side in a shallow V configuration. They were connected through a hydraulic fluid coupling clutch. Both engines powered a single 3-speed Spicer transmission with a 2-speed splitter, giving a total of 6 forward gears. Only the front of the 2 rear axles was driven. On paper, this sounded innovative. In practice, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Greyhound for the next decade. Chapter 3: The Painful Reality. Engine Problems, 1954 to 1960. The first months of Scenicruiser service revealed a cascade of problems, each one more painful than the last. Problem number 1: the electric clutch from hell. The first buses built in 1954 had an electric clutch system. It sounds modern and technological, doesn't it? In reality, it was a system where the driver pressed a pedal and an electromechanical mechanism either fully engaged or fully disengaged the clutch. There were no intermediate positions, no smoothness. The result was brutal lurches and jerks every time the driver started moving or shifted gears. Passengers sitting on the upper deck experienced the full force of physics at work on their bodies. Professional drivers, whose work demanded concentration and finesse, arrived at the end of their shifts completely exhausted. Problem number 2: engine synchronization. The 2 471 engines, connected through a single hydraulic fluid coupling, were supposed to work in perfect harmony. In reality, they constantly fell out of sync. One engine might run at 1,800 revolutions per minute, while the other ran at 1,600. Or, one engine carried a heavier load than the other. The result was vibration, uneven power delivery, and, in the worst cases, premature wear on both engines. Problem number 3: the transmission nobody could master. The 3-speed Spicer transmission with its 2-speed splitter was not synchronized. This meant that drivers required double clutching on every gear change, a technique common on trucks from the 1940s but unfamiliar to bus drivers. And the system was unintuitive. How the Scenicruiser's transmission worked differed completely from the 4-speed transmission found on all of Greyhound's other buses. Drivers who moved from one bus to another had to completely retrain themselves. Problem number 4. Broken frames. A more dangerous and costly problem emerged. Vibrations from the engines and stress on the body caused cracks in the frame around the side windows in the rear section of the bus. This wasn't just a comfort issue. This was a safety issue. Cracks in the frame meant the structural integrity of the body was compromised. The solution that came too late. Fortunately, during the production of the 1955 models, GMC reconsidered the electric clutch system. A mechanical system was developed that gave drivers much greater control. Greyhound received enough parts to retrofit all previously built buses. At the same time, the windshield wipers on the panoramic windows were upgraded with a new swing arm mechanism that maintained consistent contact with the glass. But this didn't solve the fundamental problems with the engines, the transmission, and the frame. As one Greyhound historian noted, maintaining the Scenicruiser was an endless headache, partly because of the complexity of new systems, partly because some components were too new and underdeveloped, partly because diagnostic tools were inadequate, but largely because the combination of all these factors created a perfect storm of problems. Greyhound mechanics, scattered across hundreds of cities throughout America, faced a situation where Scenicruiser maintenance required specialized training they didn't have. Local repair shops couldn't help. The system was too unusual. Spare parts often had to be ordered from far away and took weeks to arrive. Every breakdown meant lost revenue for the company and dissatisfied passengers who expected reliability from this luxurious marvel. Chapter 4. Relationships break. The end of Greyhound and GM's friendship, 1956 to 1960. The Scenicruiser problems created a rift between two giants of American transportation. Greyhound was unhappy. General Motors was unhappy. What once seemed like a natural partnership between the two companies began to cool. General Motors continued selling conventional buses to Greyhound. Models like the PD-4501 through 1960 and the PD-4501 from 1961 to 1964. But Greyhound never again asked GM to create something as ambitious and innovative as the Scenicruiser. Trust had been broken. Meanwhile, GM's competitors in the bus industry, Flexible and Beck, saw an opportunity. They began producing their own double-deck models, copying the Scenicruiser concept but using more traditional and reliable engines. Flexible released the Vistaliner 100, with 208 units built between 1955 and 1959. Beck built several of their own double-deck models. Even Mack Trucks attempted a prototype, the MV620D, in 1957, though without success. But for Greyhound, it was already too late. In 1958, the company purchased a controlling interest in Motor Coach Industries, a Canadian firm. By 1961, it owned the company outright, and by 1968, Greyhound no longer needed GMC. It was beginning to produce its own buses. By the 1970s, General Motors had essentially ceased bus production, and this once powerful division of the company simply disappeared. Chapter 5. A rescue costing $13 million. The Great Reconstruction, 1961 to 1962. By 1961, the situation had reached a boiling point. Greyhound owned nearly 1,000 Scenicruisers. More precisely, 979 remained in service. 22 had been lost in accidents. Each day, these buses rolled onto highways with unreliable engines, problematic transmissions, and cracked frames. The cost of repairs and downtime skyrocketed. A respected company proud of its reliability was now receiving hundreds of complaints from drivers and passengers. Greyhound made a historic decision. They would completely rebuild all 979 buses, replacing engines, transmission, and reinforcing frames. The cost of this retrofit program exceeded $13 million. That's an astronomical sum for the 1960s. In today's money, it would be roughly $110 million. Greyhound handed the job to Marmon Harrington, a company specializing in rebuilding commercial vehicles. Beginning in October 1961 and continuing for 11 months, hundreds of Marmon Harrington technicians systematically disassembled every Scenicruiser and rebuilt it from the inside out. What was replaced? The engines. The two 471 diesels, which together produced 320 horsepower, were removed. They were replaced with a single powerful Detroit diesel 8V71. This was a V-shaped 8-cylinder two-stroke diesel engine producing approximately 300 horsepower. It was a true workhorse, reliable, powerful, and well known to mechanics throughout North America. The transmission. The awkward 3-speed transmission with its 2-speed splitter was replaced with a 4-speed unsynchronized Spicer transmission. This was the standard across Greyhound's entire fleet of diesel buses. Drivers already knew how to operate it. The frame and reinforcements. Side bracing plates were added above the rear wheels and beneath the windows of the upper deck. This increased structural rigidity and reduced the likelihood of new cracks forming. The interior. The interior spaces were refreshed and modernized. The rebuilt buses received a new name, the Super Scenicruiser. A nameplate proclaiming the upgrade was affixed to the side of each bus. Greyhound wanted passengers to know that the problems had been solved. The results. The results were remarkable. The Super Scenicruisers operated with reliability that had never existed before. Downtime decreased, maintenance costs fell, and, most importantly, drivers and passengers gained confidence in the vehicle. Despite occasional structural issues that would periodically emerge and require further reinforcement in the 1970s, the Super Scenicruisers served far longer than expected. Many remained in service until the mid-1970s, and some even longer. Chapter 6. Legacy. Fading into history. 1975 to today. By 1975, roughly 20 years after the first buses rolled off the assembly line, Greyhound began removing Scenicruisers from its routes. About 200 buses were still in operation when the company completed the phase-out of the model in the mid-1970s. But for these legendary machines, this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. Many Scenicruisers were sold to smaller operators who continued running them under their own colors for several more years. Some fell into the hands of vintage bus enthusiasts and today are restored to near-original condition. Others were converted into motorhomes, mobile homes, and continue traveling America's highways today, though at far more modest speeds and for very different purposes. They are now homes on wheels for travelers. One notable example, country singer Hoyt Axton, who lived from 1938 to 1999, purchased a converted 1955 Scenicruiser and used it as a tour bus throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Axton even wrote a song about the bus, titled An Old Greyhound, which appeared on his 1976 album, Fearless. The Pacific Bus Museum in California today preserves a carefully restored Scenicruiser, serial number 742, originally delivered to Pacific Greyhound Lines in 1956. This bus stands as a rolling monument to an era. Cultural significance. Despite all its technical problems in its early years, the Scenicruiser holds an honored place in American culture and history. Writer John Kennedy Toole, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel A Confederacy of Dunces, published in 1980, repeatedly mentions his protagonist's journey on a Scenicruiser as a traumatic and humiliating adventure. This literary attention helped cement the Scenicruiser's place in the American consciousness as a symbol of an era, both the good and the bad. The Scenicruiser's design influenced American automobile manufacturing in ways few buses have. Its concept of raised seating and panoramic windows appeared in the 1964 Buick Sport Wagon and the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, both of which featured elevated roofs and panoramic sunroofs over the rear seating. The Scenicruiser's design influence spread across numerous manufacturers and markets. In Mexico, for example, the Sultana Panoramico, first released in 1956, borrowed heavily from Scenicruiser concepts. Chapter 7. Lessons in Engineering Ambition. The story of the Scenicruiser is not simply a tale of technical failure and recovery. It's a story about ambition. It's about how good ideas, when implemented through insufficiently tested solutions, can lead to disaster. And it's about how persistence and massive investment can salvage even the most troubled project. Raymond Loewy was right about his design. The split-level concept was revolutionary and beautiful. The panoramic windows created an experience of travel that lifted the spirits of every passenger. But General Motors engineers made a fateful error when they installed two small engines instead of one large one. It was an error born of pride, an unwillingness to use competitor engines, and a lack of vision. They couldn't foresee the synchronization problems and the complexity of maintenance. However, when problems became unavoidable, Greyhound didn't give up. Instead, the company invested enormous resources in saving its fleet. It was an expensive lesson, but it also demonstrated that complex engineering problems can be solved if you have the will and the resources. When 979 Super Scenicruisers emerged from Marmon Harrington's workshops, rebuilt and retrained, they rolled onto American highways for another generation, serving millions of passengers who never knew the dramatic story hidden beneath their aluminum skin. The Scenicruiser remains a testament to American engineering ambition, to the price of innovation, and to the power of determination in the face of overwhelming odds.